So we are now going to look at the book. I'd like you to grab a copy from your table. First of all, I would like you to turn to pages 12 and 13, which are right at the front and look like this. This page shows you all the characters who appear in the book, and it gives you kind of rough family tree telling you how everyone's related to everyone else. And before we start reading, I'll give you a very, very brief introduction to what the book's about. We've got two families, the McGowans and the Blacks. They both live on the same street, Meadow Walk, which is known locally as The Walk, hence the title of the book. And you'll see there's two grannies. There's Gran and there's Margaret, or Mags, as she is known. And these two grannies have been living on this street for donkey's years, and they don't get on very well. And as a result of them not getting on very well, the two families don't get on very well. So there's kind of a historical dispute between these two families. But the book covers a day in the life of this street and a day in the life of these two families. And that day is the wedding day of Romeo, who is over here, Romeo Black, and Kylie, who is over here, Kylie McGowan. So this is the first time that the two families have been brought together. Basically, the two families are marrying together. And the book follows the day leading up to the wedding ceremony. And as you can imagine, there's not everybody in the book is happy about this impending wedding. At Scottish Book Trust, we really encourage reading aloud, but we understand that you don't want to put anybody on the spot. So there is a specific tried and tested way to do this. So these findings came out of a session that I ran on behalf of Scottish Book Trust with one of our control groups in the Greater Glasgow area. This was a Prince's Trust team group, and the group had gone through a bit of the book before I arrived. You can see that from the first scene that we read, I've noted that there were 3 volunteers to read. These volunteers were actually the tutor, the support worker, and myself. We didn't ask learners to read initially, we just asked them to listen and follow along with the illustrations. This gave them the chance to see what kind of reading was involved and the level at which we were reading. And when we got to the second scene, you can see that I had 6 volunteers to read. 3 of those volunteers were still the tutor, the support worker, and myself, but 3 of the more confident learners had volunteered to get involved. There were caveats to this. You can see that there were learners saying, I will read if I can be a certain character. At this point, they'd already realised that some characters had shorter lines and smaller parts, which they had gauged to be manageable. But then as we went through, you'll see by the time we got to scene 5, there were learners asking to swap those characters for characters with longer lines and more to say. They'd really started to get engaged by this point. And at this point, you'll see again, there were 6 volunteers to read, and none of those were members of staff. I was able to take a seat, as were the tutor and the support worker, and learners took over doing all the reading work. By the final scene, which only had 2 characters, we still had 6 volunteers to read, and there were 3 learners who were disappointed not to be able to do it. We had people genuinely saying, I'm really sad I don't have a part. And it really is just about introducing it slowly. And what we really recommend is, if you can, getting a few staff members in to read a little bit where the learners don't have any involvement and they just read along or they follow the pictures. And that way they can get a sense of what is involved before they have to commit themselves. Also, the graphic element is there so that if anyone doesn't want to read at all, really doesn't want to read, or, can't get to grips with the text, the story is there in the pictures so they can follow along, and hopefully they will still hear what's going on, and that is useful as well, which I'll come to in a minute. And another thing to say is you've got this non-speaking character, Wheezy. So if you do get to the stage of acting this out and you've got somebody who really can't say a part, they can still be Wheezy because she is a non-speaking character. So we've tried to do as much as we can to make the book accessible to everybody. You'll notice that, I've already mentioned a couple of times that there are characters with different lengths of lines. I mean, Rab and Robbie appear throughout, and they're quite complex characters, and they've got quite a lot to say. But then you've got people like Johnny, who's Robbie's dad. In every scene that he's in, I think he never says more than one sentence at a time. He's very, very, very short little lines that his character's got. And that's been very deliberate to make sure that regardless of your reading level, you can take some kind of part. You'll notice that it's in quite an unusual font and size. This is as a result of research we've done with people who are dyslexic, and apparently this is the best font for dyslexic readers to get to grips with. And it's also an off-white paper, which is another thing that helps dyslexic readers, we've discovered. And for those of you who work with ESOL learners, there's a glossary of terms at the back. So any of the Scots, if that confounds anybody, you have got a glossary in the back. So we've gone to great lengths to hopefully make this an accessible book that just about anyone can get involved in some way. Reading aloud has tons and tons of benefits. Discovering new words is obviously one of them. And not just, when you read aloud, you don't just see the word and see the shape of it and what it looks like, you hear it. So it's not just if you see it on a signpost later, you think, I know that word. It's if you hear someone say it in conversation. So it builds that knowledge of new words on two levels. Obviously, this book is a whole group experience, so everyone gets to take a part, even if they're just reading along with the pictures. They're involved in the experience, it builds confidence, it kind of gets people bonding. That listening, even if someone's just looking at the pictures, as I know some of you were kind of following the illustrations as we went through, they're still hearing the words being said, and for all that might seem like it might just pass them by, it doesn't. Like new words do hook themselves in there that they can then recognize and use later, so it builds vocabulary. And as I've shown you with the videos and things, people get really engaged with it. They really enjoy getting into character, doing these voices, and it just is really quite fun. In spite of the fact that it's an emotive subject, it can be a really, really fun book to work with.
Good afternoon. Can I begin by saying how wonderful it is to see you all here?
Where's my grandson? Where's Romeo?
Done a runner, no doubt, gutless toe ragging.
If you could give me a moment to explain.
Well, I don't see your Kylie either.
I have a letter here.
No wonder, she'll be mortified.
Good. We all know Romeo can do better.